Okay, let me get back into Things Fall Apart again. Um, Now, as I said before, we're looking at this as a work of literature, one of the great novels of the 20th century. But also, I want us to look at it as a piece of history, too. Now, one of the things that's really interesting about Things Fall Apart is that, before Umofia and the related villages, are actually come under colonial administration, uh, you do hear references to white people among the characters. I mean, they know that there are white people. They haven't really seen any, but they know about them. Like for instance, there's one part where they talk about the white man doesn't have any toes. I mean, referring to the boots because most of the people in that part of the world either wear sandals or they don't wear shoes at all. And so, when they see the guy with the boots on, they think, what kind of weird feet does he have? I don't see any toes there. And but the other thing that's really interesting too is that in several parts of the novel, you hear mention of guns. Guns have become a regular trade item and a regular item that people used in this part of Africa. Going back to the 18th century, most likely. Guns became a common item of trade. And during the slave trade, and later on during the period of legitimate trade. Now, one of the interesting things, however, and is that after the scramble for Africa and after the European powers met in Berlin in 1884, 1885, one of the rules that they had was that only old-fashioned muskets would be sold to Africans. The kind of guns where you had to put the powder down the barrel, then you put the balls in there, and then you had to pull back the matchlock, and it would hit hard enough to ignite the powder, and then send the balls out of the musket. Uh, and what we see is that by the time you get to the middle part of the 19th century, around the time of the Crimean War, and then about 5 or 6 years later, the Civil War in the United States or the Franco-Prussian War, uh, which is in 1866. By the time you get to that period in European history, the old musket-style gun is no longer used. You have modern guns with bullets, with enclosed bullets, and you have rifles. They have a rifle, of course, is a gun where you have the kind of curves or swirls inside of the barrel. It's a rifled barrel. That kind of swirling inside of a gun barrel is referred to rifling, which makes it a rifle, and that makes the bullet much more accurate when it's shot. And this technology was not sold to Africans. Africans could only get the old-fashioned muskets, which tended to be less accurate and also tended to take a lot longer to reload. Now, the one exception to this ends up being Ethiopia, where the Ethiopian government is able to get modern guns. Matter of fact, they even get machine guns, which is why they are able to defeat the Italians when the Italians invade them in 1896. But the people in eastern Nigeria have no such luck. And so, but they do have guns. And guns, of course, would be very important because using a gun is one of the things, and having misfortune with it is one of the things that gets Okonkwo in a great deal of trouble. But anyway, as I said before, Okonkwo had a personality, a very hard driving, very aggressive, a personality that allowed him to, you know, have great success early in life. But eventually, it would be something that would hurt him as he got older. Now, to go back to the story early in life again, early in life, there was a rich man in the town, a fellow by the name of Nwakibi, who loans him yams that allows him to get started. you know, and he works very hard and pays him back, and becomes very successful. And so at the time we're introduced to Okonkwo in the story, I mean, he's a very successful man. However, a really unfortunate situation leads to even greater misfortune for Okonkwo in his eventual downfall. And so what happens is that a man in the neighboring village kills a woman from Umofia. And as a result, in order to avoid war, the village sends two youth over to the village. They send a young woman, and they also send the boy. Now, the boy ends up staying with Okonkwo. His name is Ikemefuna. And Ikemefuna is a little bit older than Okonkwo's oldest son, a young man by the name of Nwoye. Now, Okonkwo's really not very happy with Nwoye, because Nwoye reminds him of his father. Nwoye is not a guy who really wants to get out and bust his backside, planting yams. Nwoye likes music, he likes poetry, the kind of things that Okonkwo sees as being too girly, to kind of use a vernacular term. And, he wants his son to be rough and tough, be a macho man like him, and, get out there and bust his butt in the sun, working. Ikemefuna is an interesting young man because Ikemefuna, he knows stories, he knows tales, he knows the culture, he was close to his mother back in his home village. And he knows a lot of stories and tales, but also he's responsible, he's intelligent, he's a hard worker. And Okonkwo really likes him. He's like, man, this is a nice little boy. And, after a while, the kid really, feels like this is his home. He calls Okonkwo father. And, and Okonkwo likes the child, he's adopting him, that, he doesn't formally adopt him, but, that he's taking care of him as a child, as one of his children. And his oldest, biological son, Nwoye, really likes him. Now, things get complicated, however, because the people in the village, they go through their religious process, and it's determined that Ikemefuna should be put to death. That is the appropriate response for the reason he was originally brought to the village, which was in exchange for a man killing a woman from their village. Now, the other men in the village tell Okonkwo, don't participate in this. You stay at home. Ikemefuna calls you father. It would not be good if you help kill him. But what we see is that the same thing that makes Okonkwo a big tough guy is also a weakness. He is so afraid of looking soft that he insists on participating in killing Ikemefuna. Matter of fact, he is the guy who takes his machete and hacks Ikemefuna to death with it. Now, this begins a downward spiral for Okonkwo, because Okonkwo knows he's done something evil. He knows he loved the boy. Now, he knew that within the culture that they lived in, they had determined he was going to die. He probably felt he had to accept that he would die. Although I suspect he probably could have raised a fuss about that if he'd wanted to. I don't know how successful it would have been, but I don't think anybody would have looked down on him if he said, hey, I love this little kid. I don't want to see him die. Even if he lost that argument, I don't think anybody would have held that against him, because he was a father to the kid. But, Okonkwo was not the kind of person who felt he could go against the rules. But, psychologically, this is devastating to him. for a couple of chapters, he's processing this because he knows he's done wrong. But more importantly, his son in Waye totally loses any kind of emotional connection to his father. He's not aggressive. He's not the kind of person who's going to stand up and argue. But he no longer respects his father. He no longer has any use for the values that his father espouses. And so they drift apart. Now, what the book does mention is that Okonkwo is very happy with one child of his, and that's his daughter, Izinma. Izinma is a daughter by his second wife, Ekwefi. And she's a very beautiful girl. Her mother, Ekwefi, was very beautiful, or probably still was very beautiful at the time the story was taking place. And, he liked her because she reminded him of how pretty his wife, Ekwefi, was, when he married her. And also, she was kind of a bit of an ace in the hole for him, in that by having a very, very beautiful daughter, he could probably get a very industrious son-in-law with money, who would be somebody who could help him out. And there's one really interesting story in the book, where Chielo, the priestess over the oracle, demands to see Izinma. And they're afraid. What's going to happen to her? Is she going to take her away and make her live with her? Is she going to say the gods called for her and she has to be sacrificed to something? And you have the chapter in the book where it's a moonless night, and remember, these people are out in the forest, and so when there's no moon, it's pitch black. If you don't have a little, if you don't have a torch with you, you're not going to see a blessed thing. But he's out in the woods, looking for Izinma. Eventually he gets her back. But, Okonkwo is scared to death. He loves this child. And, he doesn't want her to be lost. But the point is that, after he kills Ikemefuna, his older son doesn't, lose his respect for him. And frankly, the other people, although it's not mentioned in the book, they are probably looking at him, they're probably giving him a side eye. Because they're saying, dude, what are you doing killing this child? Now, it's been determined that this child has to die, but everybody knows you love this child. Why did you do this? And so this is something that hurts him. Now, Okonkwo's temper hurts him in other ways, too. Like, for instance, during the week of peace, he beats his youngest wife, which is a violation of the rules. And so he's punished for that. And eventually, at the wedding of his friend Obiarika's daughter, he shoots his, he attempts to shoot his gun, it backfires, and he accidentally kills somebody. And accidentally killing somebody means that he's banished from the village for 7 years, and he has to go to his mother's village, where he stays with his uncle Uchendu, and that he allows him to get reestablished in that village. Now, this is very crucial because during the time that he is away, Umofia becomes part of the new colonial system. Umofia, white colonial officials, British colonial officials show up, and they incorporate Umofia into the colonial structure. Also, Christian missionaries show up, and they build a church. Now, it's interesting. They build a church in the area that's known as the Evil Forest. This is a place where it's felt evil spirits are, and so nobody wants to go there. And also, interestingly enough, twins were considered to be evil. And when people had twins, they put them in the forest to let them die. Now, this is a really interesting thing because Eastern Nigeria tends to have an extremely high percentage of twins. I read in one source that almost 1 out of every 3 births in certain parts of Eastern Nigeria are twins. And so twins are extremely common. And so you can imagine that's a lot of little babies that end up dying out there in the evil forest. But when the missionaries come, local village people say, "Oh yeah, sure, you can have that plot of land right over there," because they say it's the evil force. It is sure that if these people put this church up in the evil forest, spirits are going to come get them and they'll be run away. Now that doesn't happen, and what we see, and this is a very significant thing, is that people who have low status, people who have violated rules, people who don't fit in, they very quickly embrace Christianity. And this is a very important thing to understand about any religion, is that people tend to not change their traditional values if all's going well for them. People tend to move to new religions when they see an advantage. I mean, like for instance, in the Sahel zone, Islam is very, very attractive because Islam is connected to a wider world. Islam is a literate religion. People gain the use of an alphabet. There's a legal system connected with it. And also, as we saw in the case of the Fulani or Fulbe people, Islam allowed them to have a way to criticize what they felt were unfair practices. And they are able to use Islam to protest and to really organize and fight and gain power. That's why, you have what they call the House of Fulani Emirates in northern Nigeria. The Fulani, that was something that we talked about on the last assignment, about how these folks were able to come in and they used Islam to establish the power. Well, Christianity has a similar appeal. People who were unhappy with the traditional system gravitated towards Christianity. And one of the people who goes towards Christianity eventually is Nwoye, Okonkwo's son. And so after this period of 7 years is over, Okonkwo returns to Umuofia, and he sees now that there is the European presence there. You have the missionary, Mr. Brown, who, and as the book mentions, Mr. Brown, although he wants to convert people to Christianity, he really makes an effort to be respectful of what local people believed. He doesn't want to go there and disrespect people and be nasty to them. He wants to win them over. And he actually develops a pretty good relationship with the elders, in the village. And because of that, he is able to convert more people, and the elder in particular that he really talks to is a fellow by the name of Akuna. And, Akuna, points out to him that, there are religious beliefs in the Igbo system of spirituality that are quite similar to those in Christianity. And so Brown is pretty successful in working out, a good relationship. Now, what we see is that over time, Brown goes away, and a new missionary comes there, a fellow by the name of the Reverend James Smith, who is much more of a fundamentalist. And, he looks at the Africans as just these bloodthirsty savages who need the love of Christ to keep them from going straight to hell. And he really doesn't show any respect for their traditions. He's much more arrogant. And also, this is very significant because you do have those Africans who have converted, who, as I said before, these were people who didn't necessarily have the highest status. And so a lot of these people were hostile to traditional beliefs. And a lot of these people, were prepared to be antagonistic towards their neighbors now that they had the backing of the new government and the new religious system. But Mr. Brown held that back. What we see, however, with Reverend Smith is that he has no such compunctions. He doesn't care if they disrespect. And so eventually what we see is that, one of the followers kills the sacred python that, crawls through the village. Nobody ever bothers a snake because he's a sacred python and they just leave him alone. And, this is not unusual. In some parts of Nigeria, villages have sacred crocodiles. They're usually pygmy crocodiles, but they have a little pen for them and they crawl around. Nobody about messing with the crocodile because it's seen as a sacred animal. In this village, they had a sacred python. And, one of the Christian converts killed the python. And eventually what happens is that one of these Christian converts rips off a mask of the men in the village when they're having a religious ceremony. And, Okonkwo, of course, is part of this group that puts on masks and represents the ancestors. Now, these guys, of course, are very offended by this, and they respond to this. They rough up the guy who takes off the mask, and all these leaders end up being put in jail. Now, what these folks realize is that, hey, we don't like what the British are doing, but the British, they simply are they're in a position to make us do what they want us to do. And they had also heard that, when there was an uprising in a neighboring village, the British came in and hanged the leadership. And, most people like the idea of their neck not being stretched involuntarily. And so most people realized they could not fight the British. Okonkwo, however, ends up fighting a messenger. He ends up killing a messenger. And of course, that means that, he's marked for death. And so he ends up committing suicide. And so the great irony here is that he had lived his whole life to gain honor and to gain a position in Omofia. But he ends up violating one of the basic rules that one does not commit suicide. And matter of fact, the local people actually have the British people take him down. They have the people working for the British take him down because in their tradition, he was an unclean body. The fact that he committed suicide, and so he ends up losing everything. Now, as I said before, Things Fall Apart works as a piece of literature. It's one of these classic pieces of literature in the sense that the main character has tragic flaws that eventually destroy him. But also, it works as a piece of history because in Eastern Nigeria, Christianity was really crucial in gaining control of the local population. Because, see, the thing about Eastern Nigeria, as I said before, Eastern Nigeria did not have a tradition of having kings and chiefs. I mean, when the British first came there, they mentioned this in the book. People are looking for a chief, and they realized that these people don't really have one. So the British have to create chiefs for them. They have to create leaders. And also, by converting people to Christianity, they are creating more educated Africans that they can use as low-level administrators to help them manage the local population. And so Christianity is not only important from a spiritual standpoint to the Europeans, it's also a practical tool that allows these British to come in and to establish some kind of cultural and sociological control over the local population. Because, ultimately, no government wants to be in a situation where it continually has a gun pointed at somebody. There was a famous, oh gosh, I can't remember his name right now, an Italian thinker. I can't remember his name right now, but he talked about a weak state. A strong state is a state that has an ideology that the majority of people accept and willingly go along with. A weak state is a state that has to use the barrel of a gun in order to make people do things. And so the British understood that if they were going to actually control Eastern Nigeria, there had to be some sort of buy-in from people there. And so Christianity allowed them to get buy-in. Also, we don't see it in this book, but we can see the beginnings of it. Christianity is a modus that allows them to bring in Western concepts, literacy, education, and among the Igbo themselves, eventually these would be some of the Nigerians who were most eager to accept Western education. You know, it's not an example, it's not an accident that Chinua Achebe is an Igbo writes this book. You know what I mean? Chinua Achebe is about a generation and a half, or maybe 2 generations away from the Okonkwo. I mean, Chinua Achebe was at an age where somebody like Okonkwo could have been his father, or maybe his grandfather. And so he didn't live through that, but he definitely knew the stories of people like Okonkwo. And, you know, he was educated, you know, went to, you know, university in Nigeria and you know, developed a very strong Western education. That's why he wrote such a good novel, you know, with all these Western concepts that influence it. And so one of the great ironies of Chinua Achebe is that although he's criticizing colonialism, he was very much a product of the colonial system. And so Things Fall Apart really does literally show how the traditional society fell apart and how the colonial society came to take its place. Well, anyway, I hope these couple of lectures I'm posting today will be helpful to you all in analyzing the book. Take care.